For years, Elena ate only rice so Marcus could build his startup by day. She thought they were building a future together, until the truth came out. They met in college, both broke teenagers from struggling families. Marcus grew up in a trailer park, his single mother working double shifts at a factory just to keep the lights on. Elena came from a family of immigrants who cleaned houses and worked restaurant kitchens, dreaming their daughter would have better. When Marcus and Elena found each other in their freshman computer science class, they recognized the hunger in each other's eyes, the desperate need to escape poverty that had defined their childhoods. Elena believed in Marcus when everyone else saw just another poor kid with impossible dreams. She worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night, serving coffee at dawn, tutoring kids after classes, all so Marcus could focus on coding his revolutionary platform. For months, Elena survived on rice and tap water, telling Marcus she wasn't hungry when he offered to share his ramen. Her hands were cracked and bleeding from industrial cleaning chemicals, but her faith never wavered. "One day, baby," she'd whisper, holding him when rejection letters piled up like bills they couldn't pay. "One day they'll see what I see." In their cramped studio apartment with broken heating, they'd huddle under donated blankets, Marcus's laptop balanced between them as he coded through the night. Elena would fall asleep to the sound of his typing, dreaming of the empire they'd build together. "When we make it," Marcus promised during those frozen nights, "I'll give you everything. You're my queen, Elena, my partner in everything." Those words felt sacred then, carved into their souls when love was literally all they possessed. 5 years of rejection. 5 years of Elena working doubles while Marcus refined his algorithm. She'd come home exhausted, hands raw from cleaning, to find him frustrated and defeated. "Maybe I should get a real job," he'd say. "Never," Elena would respond fiercely. "This is your calling. I can see the future you're building." She sold her grandmother's ring to keep them afloat during month 19. She never told Marcus. When he finally discovered the empty jewelry box, she found him crying in the bathroom. "I'm destroying you," he sobbed. "You're building us," she corrected, holding his face in her work-worn hands. She attended every investor meeting, dressed in thrift store finds but radiating confidence in her husband. When venture capitalists dismissed him, she'd squeeze his hand under the table. At home, she'd run the numbers, suggest improvements, be his sounding board and his strength. Her own dreams, law school, her own career, got quietly shelved. "Later," she'd say, "when Marcus succeeds, then it's my turn." She never resented the sacrifice. Love made it feel like investment in their shared future. The turning point came through pure persistence and a stroke of luck. After 5 years of rejections, Marcus had refined his platform into something revolutionary, a data analytics system that could predict market trends with unprecedented accuracy. Elena had been the one to suggest targeting smaller firms first, building credibility before approaching major corporations. She'd researched every potential client, crafted every pitch email, scheduled every meeting while working her night shifts. The breakthrough came when a mid-level executive at Datatech Solutions actually tested Marcus's demo during a conference Elena had convinced him to attend, despite their empty bank account. She'd sold her laptop to pay for his conference ticket and presentation materials. The executive was stunned by the results. Marcus's algorithm had predicted their quarterly performance within a margin of error so small it seemed impossible. Word spread quickly through tech circles. Suddenly, the phone that had been silent for years was ringing constantly. But it was TechCorp's CEO who made the call that changed everything. Elena was at the diner working her lunch shift when Marcus called, his voice shaking with disbelief. "50 million, Elena. They want to buy the platform for $50 million. Elena screamed so loudly that the entire diner stopped to stare. Her coworkers watched her cry happy tears into the phone, not caring that she was making a scene. That night, Marcus carried her around their tiny apartment, both of them sobbing and laughing. "We did it, baby. We actually did it." Elena quit all 3 jobs the next day, walking out of that office building for the last time, her cleaning uniform left in a crumpled heap in her locker. They bought their first house. "Nothing too extravagant," Elena insisted. "Let's be smart with this blessing." Marcus agreed completely. In every interview, he credited her. "My wife Elena is the real founder. She sacrificed everything for this dream." At their first tech gala, he pulled her close, telling anyone who'd listen how she'd believed when no one else would. Elena enrolled in law school, Marcus beaming with pride. They were partners in every sense, their love stronger than ever after surviving the test of poverty and perseverance. The money kept growing. Marcus's platform exploded globally, valuation hitting 9 figures, Suddenly, they were invited to exclusive events, rubbing shoulders with celebrities and moguls. Elena watched Marcus transform at these gatherings, more confident, more commanding. She was proud, but sometimes felt lost in rooms full of people who spoke in millions, like she once spoke in hundreds. Marcus started traveling more, closing deals, expanding the empire. Elena supported every trip, every late night, every missed dinner. "This is our moment," she'd say, even as loneliness crept in. She threw herself into law school, but something felt different. Marcus came home from a Silicon Valley conference, changed. He talked about networking, about strategic relationships. He started critiquing Elena's clothes, her conversation topics. "Maybe take some courses on business etiquette," he suggested gently. Elena felt stung but complied. She wanted to be worthy of their new world. She hired stylists, attended charm school, learned wine pairing. But the more she changed, the more distant Marcus seemed. At parties he'd introduce her as my wife rather than my partner who built this with me. The shift was subtle but devastating. Elena told herself she was imagining things. Success was just overwhelming them both. Marcus hired a new executive consultant. Her name was Victoria, and she was a stunning woman with an MBA from Wharton and connections throughout Silicon Valley. Elena met her at a company party and felt immediately threatened, though she couldn't articulate why. Victoria was everything Elena wasn't: polished, connected, born into wealth. She spoke Marcus's new language fluently. Elena watched them huddled in conversation at events. Victoria's laugh like silver bells at Marcus's jokes. "She's brilliant," Marcus would say. "Really understands the landscape." Elena tried to connect with Victoria but felt like a child playing dress-up in adult clothes. Her law school achievements felt insignificant next to Victoria's corporate conquests. Marcus started staying late for strategy sessions. He'd come home energized, talking about Victoria's insights, her connections, her vision for expansion. Elena felt herself becoming invisible in her own life. When she tried to contribute to business discussions, Marcus would nod absently, then turn to his phone to text Victoria some brilliant thought. Elena threw herself into her studies, but the apartment felt empty even when Marcus was home. He was always somewhere else mentally, planning, scheming, building with someone who wasn't her. The promises from their broke days felt like ancient history. Elena tried to bring up her feelings, but Marcus dismissed them as stress from school. "Once you graduate, you'll understand the pressure I'm under," he said. Elena swallowed her hurt and nodded. She was losing him and didn't know how to fight for something that felt already decided. The signs had been building for months, but Elena had chosen to ignore them. Marcus's late nights became later, his explanations vaguer. "Victoria and I are working on something revolutionary," he'd say, eyes bright with excitement that used to be reserved for conversations with Elena. Phone calls that he'd take in other rooms, business trips that seemed to require constant communication with his consultant. The way his face lit up when Victoria's name appeared on his screen, Elena tried to convince herself she was being paranoid. This was just business, just the pressure of success. But her instincts screamed danger with every mysterious smile, every whispered phone call, every time Marcus came home smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. The discovery came on a Tuesday afternoon in spring. Elena had left her constitutional law class early with a migraine, driving home through quiet suburban streets to their mansion, the dream house they'd planned together during those hungry nights in their studio. She used her key quietly, not wanting to disturb Marcus if he was on a call. The house felt different as she stepped inside. Too quiet, yet somehow charged with an energy that made her skin prickle. She called out Marcus's name softly, but got no response. Moving through the foyer toward his office, she heard voices, low, intimate, definitely not business. What she saw in the living room destroyed her world in an instant. Marcus and Victoria were on the couch, their couch, the one Elena had saved for months to buy when they were still struggling. Not just talking, not just sitting close, but intertwined in a way that spoke of familiarity, of intimacy that had been building for months. They sprang apart when they saw her, Victoria gathering her scattered papers with practiced efficiency, while Marcus couldn't meet Elena's eyes. The silence stretched like a knife blade between them. "How long?" Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "Elena, this isn't what," Marcus started. "How long?" she repeated, stronger now. Victoria had the grace to look ashamed as she slipped past Elena toward the door. "I'm sorry," she murmured, but Elena barely heard her. All her focus was on Marcus, this stranger wearing her husband's face. 6 months, he finally admitted. But it just happened naturally. Victoria understands my vision, my world now. She gets the pressures I'm under. Elena felt the words hit her like physical blows. I am your world, she whispered. I built your world. Marcus shook his head with infuriating certainty. That was then, Elena. This is now. Victoria and I, we're planning something bigger than you could imagine. You wouldn't understand the complexities involved. The casual cruelty took her breath away. This was the man she'd starved for, bled for, believed in when no one else would. Elena sank into the chair where she'd held him through countless rejections, where she'd celebrated their breakthrough, where she'd foolishly believed in forever. The divorce was brutal and public. Marcus's lawyers painted Elena as a gold digger who'd contributed nothing to his success. They had documentation. Every time Marcus had credited Victoria instead of Elena in recent interviews, every event where Elena had been marginalized, the narrative was clear. Marcus had simply outgrown his first wife. Elena's lawyer fought hard, but Marcus had been clever. He'd moved assets, restructured the company with Victoria as co-founder, rewritten history. The media ate it up. Tech mogul trades up, read one headline. From rags to riches to romance, proclaimed another. Elena watched in horror as their love story was reframed as a business arrangement that had run its course. Victoria played the part perfectly, the sophisticated woman who'd inspired Marcus to new heights. Elena was painted as the anchor holding him back. The settlement was generous by normal standards but insulting given what she'd sacrificed. Elena took it, wanting the nightmare to end. She moved to a modest apartment, her law degree finally complete but her spirit shattered. Friends chose sides, most picking Marcus and his money. Elena's family surrounded her, but their love couldn't fill the hole where her future used to be. She watched from afar as Marcus and Victoria became Silicon Valley's golden couple, gracing magazine covers, attending galas where Elena once stood by his side. The final insult came when Marcus gave an interview claiming he'd always been destined for greatness and crediting Victoria with showing him his true potential. 20 years of Elena's sacrifice, erased with a few sentences. Part 8. Marcus at his peak, 2,000 characters. The height of arrogance, Marcus and Victoria were unstoppable. Their combined company was valued at over $2 billion. They married in a ceremony that made international headlines. Celebrities, politicians, tech royalty all in attendance. Elena wasn't mentioned in any coverage of Marcus's inspiring journey from startup founder to billionaire. He'd successfully rewritten history, casting himself as a self-made visionary who'd simply needed the right partner to reach his potential. Victoria was pregnant now, and Marcus glowed with pride at every event. Finally building the family I always dreamed of, he told Forbes, as if Elena had never existed. The mansion they bought made Elena's old home look modest. Private jets, yacht parties, investments in space travel. Marcus lived like a king. He'd been featured on magazine covers, given TED Talks about innovative partnerships and strategic evolution. His ego had grown enormous, fed by constant praise and unlimited resources. Victoria played her role perfectly, the brilliant wife who elevated her husband's vision. Together they were Silicon Valley royalty, their success seeming unstoppable. Marcus had convinced himself he deserved it all, that his current life was inevitable. In interviews, he'd occasionally mention his early struggles in vague terms, never naming Elena or acknowledging her role. He'd even started believing his own revised history. The scared young man Elena had loved was gone, replaced by someone who saw people as assets to be acquired or discarded based on utility. Success had corrupted him completely. The unraveling began slowly, like a single thread pulled from expensive fabric. Marcus had grown so confident in his invincibility that he'd stopped paying attention to details, stopped questioning the deals Victoria brought him, stopped caring about the ethical implications of their expanding empire. It started with whispers in tech circles about data irregularities. Marcus's platform, the very foundation of his empire, was supposedly collecting information far beyond what users had consented to. Elena, following his career from afar with a mixture of fascination and dread, noticed the subtle shift in tech journalism, fewer glowing profiles, more investigative pieces asking uncomfortable questions. The first concrete blow came when a former employee, someone Victoria had fired for asking too many questions, leaked internal documents to the Washington Post. The documents revealed a systematic program of data harvesting that went far beyond corporate espionage. Marcus's company had been selling private user information to foreign governments, including authoritarian regimes that used the data to track dissidents and journalists. The scandal exploded overnight. Congressional hearings were announced, federal investigations launched, international lawsuits filed from 17 countries. Marcus watched his stock price plummet in real time, billions evaporating as investors fled. But the worst betrayal was yet to come. Victoria, ever the survivor, had seen the writing on the wall months before the leak. While Marcus had been basking in magazine covers and award ceremonies, she'd been quietly documenting everything, building a case that would paint her as an unknowing victim of his schemes. Her lawyers revealed that she'd been cooperating with federal investigators for 6 months, providing evidence in exchange for immunity. The woman who had shared his bed, borne his child, stood beside him at every gala, had been systematically destroying him from within. Every intimate conversation had been recorded, every private moment documented, every confession of wrongdoing carefully preserved for prosecutors. Marcus's arrest came at dawn, FBI agents surrounding the mansion that had once symbolized his triumph. Victoria watched from an upstairs window, their infant son in her arms, as they led her husband away in handcuffs. She'd already filed for divorce, claiming she'd been deceived and manipulated, painting herself as another victim of Marcus's deception. The federal charges were devastating: treason, fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. His bail was set at $50 million, money he no longer had. Assets were frozen, accounts seized, the empire that had taken decades to build dismantled in days. The mansion was sold at auction to pay legal fees. Private jets, art collections, investments, everything vanished into the black hole of legal costs and government seizures. Marcus found himself alone in a studio apartment remarkably similar to the one he'd shared with Elena decades earlier, facing life in federal prison. His former friends disappeared, unwilling to be associated with his radioactive scandal. Tech magazines that had once celebrated him now dissected his downfall with surgical precision. Elena read about Marcus's arrest in the morning paper over coffee in her small but peaceful apartment. She felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not sadness, just emptiness where love and hate had once battled. Her law practice was modest but successful, specializing in helping women navigate difficult divorces. She'd found purpose in protecting others from the pain she'd endured. When Marcus's letter arrived, forwarded through her lawyer, Elena almost threw it away unread. But something made her open it. The man who wrote it sounded like the boy she'd once known, broken, scared, genuinely remorseful. "I destroyed the only real thing I ever had," he wrote. "You were my foundation, and I threw you away for fool's gold. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just need you to know, everything good I ever was came from loving you. Everything evil I became happened when I stopped." Elena cried reading it, mourning not for what was, but for what could have been. She visited him once in prison. Marcus looked small in his orange jumpsuit, aged decades and months. "I'm sorry," he whispered. And Elena saw the boy she'd once loved, buried under years of corruption. "I know," she replied simply. She didn't forgive him. Forgiveness would take years, maybe forever. But she released her anger, choosing peace over poison. Walking away from that prison, Elena felt finally free. She'd learned that karma wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. Marcus had lost everything because he'd forgotten who he really was. Elena had found herself again by remembering who she'd always been, a woman of grace, strength, and infinite worth.